All right, guys, getting used to working in the garage here. I can only move so much or I get a light right in my face. These are going to be the beginning of the videos for week 2, April 6th through the 10th. My office hours are going to be from 11 to 1 p.m. daily. Apparently afternoon is better filming light, so I'm going to do this stuff in the afternoon. And I would like to schedule, if possible, a Google Meet for Monday, April the 13th. I'll try and find a time, and even if we're not all there, I'll try and record it so you can see it. Just got an email from Principal Blanchard that we are not allowed to grade or give grades. So I'm going to look at your essays and probably give you feedback if I can on like Google Thread, and then I'll send out like an answer sheet when it comes to the reading guides. I'm going to put a grade in my manual grade book in case we do have to institute them later, but do not let this pressure you. Just calm down. And we've been talking about nationalism, right? We've looked at nationalism in Italy and in Germany and Austria-Hungary, in Russia, and in China. Today we're going to look at Japan, and Japan is a little difficult because you cannot do Japanese nationalism without talking about Japanese industrialization, which comes later than that in like Great Britain, the United States, and in Germany. And so for Japan, it's going to be the speed of their industrialization and rallying behind their God King Emperor that's going to give them their nationalistic tendencies. So bear with me, some of this stuff is going to be repeated. I've combined PowerPoints, but you'll get through it. Okay, give myself 25 minutes or so from right here. So we've got to start in talking about, the Meiji Restoration. And if we go back to the reign of Tokugawa Ieyasu in 1603, he will introduce policies that will reciprocate throughout time, lasting up into the 1800s, where the Japanese cut themselves off from any outside intervention. A few Jesuit and missionaries and Dutch merchants, but the Japanese were going to practice their policy of national seclusion. And it is during this time that the rest of the world will undergo the Industrial Revolution. So by the later end of the Tokugawa era, the Japanese were stuck in their feudal past. The Japanese economy was completely different from that of the industrialized Western world. And so, since the Japanese had believed that they had formed the best society possible, they had a system where nearly 80% of their people lived as farmers, as feudal farmers down in the countryside, living in a near hand-to-mouth, like having enough food to eat just for the day existence. Their rice farming techniques were the same in 1600 as they were in 1300, all right? It's old. It has not changed. These techniques required a lot of physical labor, as there wasn't a lot of industrial technology to help them. So it's all manual labor. And coupled with that, to support their system, the aristocracy, the high-ranking daimyo, the upper lords, and their samurai, taxes were very high. And many of them were paid in foodstuffs, as the Japanese farmers still did not have a cash currency. And then, as I said, Japan in the middle of the 1800s was like Japan in the 1600s, Japan in the 1300s. No factory machinery, no steam engine, no mechanized production of any sort. No large pools of monetary wealth or capital had been, accumulated. Things stayed the way they always had. And then comes in the United States, Commodore Perry. He rolls in 1853 when Naval Admiral Commodore Perry sails into Tokyo Bay with a steamship. And the steamship is different. It's puffing chug, 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 puffing smoke. And Admiral Perry sails up and says, "Hey, Japanese, we are going to trade with you." And the Japanese are like, "What do you got? You have nothing we want." And, Perry turns the cannon and fires a shot. This flaming, exploding projectile flies out of the cannon. And going back into Japanese mythology is the power of the sacred dragon. And the Japanese are like, what? This guy has a dragon. So the next day, a couple samurai come to escort Perry to meet the emperor. They go, well, you can take 6 of your marine bodyguards. Well, Perry pulls a pistol and bam, bam, fires a couple shots. And they're like, oh my God, he's got a small smoking dragon wrapped around his hand like he's Mushu from Mulan. And the Japanese are forced to take a look at themselves. I'm going to say this several times. And they realize that they have fallen way behind. And Perry is able to get the Japanese to sign what is known as the Treaty of Friendship, where the United States has now decided to enter the game of imperialism, our next unit. And the Treaty of Friendship was designed to give the United States a favorable trade agreement with the Japanese. And what this does for the Japanese, it will completely revolutionize them. Within a few short years, the feudal system of Japan is going to collapse almost overnight. It is lightning fast. And it is going to go from a feudal economy to a modern, industrialized one. Japan saw itself as a highly civilized Confucian society. You know, the perfect, Chinese Confucian philosopher society. And it's going to revolutionize itself and become an industrial, technological one almost overnight. This is known as the Meiji Restoration. And so the restoration is going to take place, we're going to say, from like 1868 up until 1912. And as Japan, and we're going to fast forward and rewind here a little bit, as the Japanese begin to look at themselves differently, they do what they always do. They send out their young men to go study in the West, the way they had done to the Tang and Song dynasties of China way back when they were forming. And these young men study technology, and they study government, and they study legal systems and scientific systems and industry, and they bring all of this back with the goal of picking and choosing what they want to form the foundation of the modern Japanese economy. And so the Japanese are some of the world's great borrowers. They will find what you do and find a way to make it better and stronger, like a Honda Accord. You get one of those things and it will run forever. But it's going to have some side effects that we are going to talk about. And so all this is going on in the age of imperialism, where Western Europe is going out and carving up the globes into spheres of influence to get natural resources, to make money for industry. So Japan begins to see that its military strength and military power is the way for them to get what they want. So we're going to combine industrialization with militarization, focus that towards a pyramid, towards the godlike emperor, and that is what is going to rally all of Japan in their nationalism. The Japanese want things like a telegraph system. They want steam engines. They want railroads and factories to make industrial goods. And it is the Japanese imperial government that is in charge of all of this. And things start slowly. Progress is barely measurable. But they realize it's going to take time to train a workforce. Right? And Japanese industrialization is going to take place in 4 phases. We talked about phase 1, military strength being geared towards industry. All right? The second of these things is going to be an industrial combine. All right? So we're going to start slow. We're going to learn from the United States. We're going to learn from England. All right? The learning curve is going to be shorter in Japan because England and the United States and Germany have shortened the learning curve. They have a blueprint how to industrialize and how to build things. You can see from schools to post offices, and Japan is going to glean and pick what they need or want to make it a better fit for them. So second is the corporation, all right, a Japanese zaibatsu. Well, how are we going to pull this off? And a zaibatsu is a corporation. Problem is how to start one, how to get capital, what's going on. And it turns out to be a former samurai named Iwasaki Yatoru that's going to come up with a clever, unique way to handle this. Now, he managed a small shipping fleet as a samurai for his larger daimyo. And part of the Meiji Restoration is going to be getting rid of the samurai and the daimyo. There's a pretty good Tom Cruise movie called The Last Samurai that kind of talks about this Meiji period. And now that the daimyo is gone, Iwasaki draws on his experience when he has these old kind of dilapidated like river boats and ships. Well, he buys them from the government and he begins a shipping business. He'll row out to the American ships in the harbor. Do you need ferry to shore? Do you need cargo ferry to shore? And the American shipper's like, well, why should we break our backs when this guy's going to do it? And slowly but surely, he forms a shipping monopoly. As his business grows and he gets more money, he buys better ships and bigger ships, and pretty soon he's got a fleet. He's the sole provider of taking cargo from the deep water port to the inland waterways and back. And he saves all of his money. And Yatoru is going to open a bank called the Mitsubishi Bank. It's the foundation of the Mitsubishi multinational corporation today. Very similar to the Italian merchant in San Francisco after the Great Fire and earthquake. He took his money and gave it out in loans to small businesses, charging interest on the return, and built the Bank of America. Well, that's what Yatoru does here with his Zaibatsu. That's how he gains the capital. And other corporations quickly followed him. Now, what's really going to help Japan is they need railroads, right? Japan, world leader in the bullet trains and the railroads today. Part of the problem with Japan is their geography. Remember, it's jagged and it's difficult and it's tough. It's like going through Greece. Well, it was difficult and expensive to ship things along the archipelago because of this geography, and it's a chain of islands. Well, the railroads are going to solve this problem. And areas that had once been untapped and isolated are now drawn into Japan. People now feel connected. This also opens up a source of cheap labor for Japan and new resources. And it's because that the Japanese people are all united under this effort. It creates a very stable environment to work in. And the Japanese people have this near unique mindset where they are able to sacrifice short-term tangible gain for themselves for long-term results. The Japanese are in it for the long game. They may say, well, I may not see the fruits of my labor, but my children and my grandchildren will. So in a short span of 30 to 50 years, Japan will change from a feudal economy to a modern industrial one, literally overnight. And so by we get to the turn of the 20th century, Japan has made incredible gains. And they want acknowledgement for what they had accomplished. They want someone to say, hey guys, good job, you've done well. And they began to believe that the acquisition of colonies, imperial conquest, is the way to get Europe's attention, the way to get them to recognize what they had done. So the Japanese want to go to war with an opponent. We'll talk about this a little later on, but they start off by fighting in China. 1895, 1896, they go to war with China and they carve off some territory. One of the things Japan does not have is a lot of industrial natural resources like iron ore and coal and bauxite, things that are needed for heavy industry, iron and steel production. So they go into China and they make China sign an agreement, if you remember last week, where China has to say, if any Japanese economic interests are threatened, the Japanese can invade with their army to protect them. So they go to war with China, and you'll see a slide later on that shows like dying China. And, Japan wants recognition. And the rest of the world's like, well, yeah, but that's China. Everyone's beating them up. You know, everyone and their brother has carved off a sphere of influence there. So there's no recognition for that. So by this time, Japanese say, fine, we've got to pick on a prime-time European opponent. So in 1905, 1906, they enter in a war with Russia, where they go out and they sink the Russian Pacific Fleet, which was also their whaling fleet, on the Kamchatka Peninsula, if you've ever played Risk. And they sink it and they declare war. Well, Japan knew that Russia couldn't go all the way through the North Sea, down through the Atlantic, around the Horn of Africa, across the Indian Ocean, through the South China Sea, and up the Pacific. There was no way there was going to be any retaliation. And Japan's like, yes, we defeated Mother Russia. But Russia has really never been given any credence or respect by other European countries. So when this victory isn't acknowledged, Japan begins to get angry. All right? The Japanese will then drive the Russians out of some of the mainland in Asia, and they gain territory. And they get a peace treaty that will be signed by President Roosevelt, as the old decaying Russian bear is defeated by this new modern Japanese nation. And the peace treaty, written by President Roosevelt, heavily favors Japan. The only problem is Japan is still on the receiving end of unfair trade treaties coming from the West. And so this will bring us up to World War I, where the Japanese are acquiring raw materials that help their industry grow, especially iron production. And here comes the nationalism. Japan is extremely proud of what they've done, going from feudal to modern industrial overnight, winning a war against powerful, mother civilization China, and then going and beating the famous Russian bear, getting President Roosevelt to help out. They are really beginning to buy in to their success. But the Japanese need industrial resources, things like iron, bauxite, coal, chemical manufacturing. And during World War I, as Europe is caught in its death match and the former creditor to the world, Western Europe, is destroyed and becomes the largest debtor to the world, Japan will emerge as one of only two functioning industrial economies in the world, with the United States being the other one. As a result, Japan is welcomed to the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles that ends World War I. Right? Prince Konyei, the emperor's brother, is going to get a seat there. And Japan is extremely proud of their achievements. But Japanese stuff is getting really good. It's competitive in price and quality with European goods. Japanese stuff is great. And so while Western Europe and the United States went through the growing pains to industrialize, going through trial and error processes, Japan has skyrocketed right up to the front of the line. So here, by the 1920s, Japan has a complete modern look. The cities were looking more Western, even the style of dress causing a tension between the young kids and the old school Japanese people was changing. The standard of living has been raised. Boys and girls are both going to school. A 90% literacy rate has been achieved. The workforce is still working long, back-breaking hours, but Japan is gaining ground. And this is going to be very important. I got to go back a second. For the Japanese, just before, in the mid 1920s, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Just before the Great Depression hits the world, Japan will encounter a massive earthquake in 1926. It destroys and erases a lot of the economic gains they had made. All right, but all of this, they're looking around going, oh my God, we've just been destroyed. But they then try to do all the rebuilding, the fixing of everything internally. And the problem is there's massive inflation for Japanese products, because it was really hard to get the raw materials into Japan. The manufacturing centers, the industrial supply lines, along with the assembly lines, were heavily damaged. And so imported goods, especially from the United States, who's just booming and thriving in the roaring 20s, are much cheaper. And so then the Great Depression hits. And we think of the Great Depression in context with, the United States, or maybe even Germany with Hitler's rise to power, but it reciprocates and affects things worldwide. And as a result of this, there's going to be a problem in the government. The Japanese Constitution that we are going to talk about will, in times of crisis, be allowed for what's called the Imperial War Council, with guys like, Admiral Toyota and General Kawasaki, literally multinational corporation guys, to take over, headed by a guy named Hideki Tojo. And this militaristic government will focus on the military. So while Japan not only industrializes quicker and faster than anybody else, they recover from the Great Depression. By 1934, Japan has fully recovered. And the primary reason for this is that all the manufacturing was built for weapons for war. The famous Mitsubishi A626 fighter, the aircraft carriers that will attack Pearl Harbor, naval ships. Everything is going to be built for the military. All right, steel production, electrical plants, chemical factories, everything focused on science and technology to get ahead of their competitors. So by the mid-1930s, when everyone else is crippled in the heart of the Great Depression, upstart Japan is outdoing everybody else. But the Japanese still want recognition from the Western imperial powers. They want acknowledgement. So they begin to revive the ancient code of Bushido, the cult around this young emperor named Hirohito. He's got this militaristic group of advisors, and they felt if the West can go out at will and carve up like Africa and South America and parts of Asia, then we can too. So Emperor Hirohito will become the revered head of this new Japanese government. And so here is where things are going to change. Again, here is Admiral Perry showing up, in Japan with his steam engine. And as the Japanese are sitting there, and they take this introspective look at themselves, here's where we're going to rewind a little bit. They realized, okay, we can no longer assume we're the best in the world. We have to change things. So as in the past, the Japanese will send out their young men. Like this guy, Fukuzawa Yukichi. I love to tell his story. And he's going to go abroad the Pacific Ocean. He's going to be sent to the United States to study in the West. And he's headed for San Francisco. And the government has, purchased him a nice stateroom on a trans-Pacific, ship going from Japan back to San Francisco on one of the upper decks where he could, rest and, drink and eat and hang out with all the other rich mucky mucks. But that's not who Fukuzawa was. He shows up in his overalls. And he goes down in the engine room and he's got his tool belt with him and he's in his overalls. He's got a clipboard and he's drawing up, mechanical drawings, and he's looking at the steam engine and he's asking the mechanics and the ship engineer questions, and they're like, buddy, you're supposed to be up there with the rich guys eating and drinking like you do on a cruise. He's like, no, I want to know all about this thing. And they say, why? And Fukuzawa says, well, because I bet you I will build a more efficient steam engine that will get me to, the next time I return to San Francisco, my machine will do it faster. Now, to his credit, Fukuzawa will. Next time he travels from Japan to California, I think I just lost a drill bit there yet, he will get there a couple days faster. Now, it takes him about 2 weeks this time, and he does it in like 11 to 12 days the second time. Now, to be fair, Fukuzawa's steam engine was more efficient, it was newer and quicker, and the one that he was on at this time is kind of old and worn out. It doesn't matter because Fukazawa accomplished his goal. And when Fukazawa returns, he comes back with a little bit more than what the Japanese bargained for. Fukazawa says, yeah, I got ideas about science and government, economics, and legal systems, but what you guys in Japan have to understand is that the Western way of life is intertwined with their freedom. He said that freedom must exist. All right? It's grounded in their legal and their political systems. This independent spirit that these Americans have drives them to do better. People put their whole heart into their jobs because they know, if they work harder, they'll get more money for it. If they have an idea or a better way to do things, they will be rewarded for it. So there is a payoff for ingenuity and initiative and taking a chance. If not, if there's no incentive, no way to make more money or to benefit or change your social class, then people will put forth a minimum effort. So we're going to create a student, let's say Kevin. Take a student named Kevin. And Kevin's mom says, Kevin, I want you to clean up your bedroom. You've been in here during, coronavirus homeschool, and you've got like potato chip wrappers and, old pieces of pizza kicked under the bed, and you've been wearing the same sweatpants playing video games for 12 hours a day. And Kevin looks around and says, okay, Mom, and he goes over to his clothes pile. Woo, man, this is the dirty clothes. He doesn't put them in the hamper, he kind of kicks them next to the closet, and yeah, I could probably wear these again, and he kind of throws it on the bed, and then, oh man, these are the clean clothes about 2 weeks ago for school, and he throws them in the corner. To make his mom happy, he kind of straightens the comforter on his bed, his 3 piles of clothes look a little better, and he shuts the closet door, doesn't take them to the laundry room. And as Kevin is sitting back down in his chair to start playing video games again, ding dong, there's someone at the door, and Kevin's mom opens, and oh, lo and behold, there is a young lady there from Kevin's class. Hi, Mrs. Kevin. I'm having trouble with Mr. Melega's world history class. Any chance I could get some help from Kevin? Kevin's mom's overjoyed. Oh my God, Kevin, yes. Get you out of your video game, funk. I have a student here, someone to help you. Now Kevin hears his mom, and he looks down and he sees a young lady from his class saying, hey, can I study with you? Kevin becomes Barry Allen. He zooms around the house. He picks up the dirty clothes, puts them in the clothes basket, takes them to the laundry room, puts his clean clothes away. He does kind of hide his semi-clean clothes under the bed. He puts the comforter on the bed. He Febrezes, vacuums, and dusts by the time Kevin's mom and his study partner come on up. The difference is Kevin had an incentive. He didn't want to be embarrassed in front of another member of his class, right? Especially a young lady, I guess. So this is what Fukazawa is talking about. Kevin not being, wanting to look bad will clean his room. When his mom told him to do it, what's the worst she could do? Take his video games away from us, so we'll shuffle some clothes, and we'll kind of do this, and then we're just going to let it roll. It's all about what can you do, the incentive that makes you want to work. So, Kevin doesn't want to be made to look bad. He wants to be a good helper student, so he cleans his room for his mom, which he should have done in the first place. So, kind of a long made-up example, but it just popped into my head. So, with this in mind, it's the governmental and the legal systems. At the end of the 19th century, Japan has realized its efforts. It has become the first non-Western country to build a modern nation state. It has done it. It's progressed towards its goal. It is a rival in wealth and power to the industrialized Western countries. And political parties begin to form, not quite Democrat and Republican, but the Japanese equivalent. And the right to hold elections will be written into a brand spanking new Japanese constitution. Its idea, just like, Kevin, not to be made to look bad, This was an idea to get people to work their hardest. See, we are becoming more like the West. Jump in, everybody do their part. Be UVA basketball and do your role, and we're going to be fine. So the National Assembly, known as the Diet, is created, and at the top, the figurehead is the emperor. And everybody is going to unite behind him, the emperor and his people. We're going to get rid of those old, traditional, ancient Japanese samurai ways, and we're going to do something different. But Japanese are sly here. The Constitution was written on Otto von Bismarck's model from Prussia. Japanese just adapted it and made it fit better for Japan, with all the power being augmented going towards the emperor. Right? It limits the power of the Diet, the Japanese legislature, and the power goes to the emperor. The emperor is seen as sacred. He is a living representation of the sun goddess, a sun, S-O-N, of the S-U-N. He's sacred. He is incorruptible. And while the Diet's in session, they have to listen to him. The emperor is in charge of the military. He's able to appoint an assistant, a prime minister. And he issues political decrees. So in effect, the Diet has to do what the emperor says. The Constitution is presented as a gift to the people of Japan from their emperor. But Japan is industrialized. They're going to show the world what it can do. And so earlier I talked about the 1894-1895 war with China over interests. And when Japan wins this, they force China to sign an agreement saying that if any Japanese business or factory was threatened, the Japanese military can intervene. And when there's a rebellion in China, the Boxer Rebellion, the Japanese send in their troops with the other European powers. As they put down the Boxer Rebellion, this is a chance for Japan to show that they belong with the big boys. So here is Japan going to war with Russia. Here is young Emperor Hirohito. And now we are going to revive the power of the samurai, the empire of the rising sun. So, by signing with this business agreement that the Japanese had with China, the Japanese are looking for a bigger target to showcase their power. And so they secure an alliance with the United States, their old friend back from Perry's days, that if they get into a war with Russia, the other European powers are not going to intercede. So they get into this war with Russia, and we know about President Roosevelt and the treaty that he signs. And so now it's time for the empire of the rising sun. Young Emperor Hirohito here is going to reign from 1926 to 1989. And one of the problems that Japan is going to have to deal with is internal struggles. What happens as a result of all of this? And as we get through the 1920s, Japanese urban workers were enjoying a newfound prosperity. All right, they're doing well. They're making money. All right. The problem is this causes unforeseen repercussions as it goes down into the younger people. People began to emulate the West. They began to wear like poodle skirts and saddle shoes. They're doing Western dances. They've forgotten the age-old values, like the respect for elders, discipline and respect for your elders that has existed in China since time began. There is also a growing rivalry between the civilian government and military officers. And the military men said that Western influence is corrupting Japan. We need to return to the old way of doing things, the discipline, the dedication to duty, the honor of the samurai. And then the Great Depression is going to kick in. And the Great Depression is one of the final blows for the civilian government. as I said, as Japan was recovering from that earthquake, the Great Depression hits hard. And Japanese items were of such good quality that foreign buyers could no longer afford to buy Japanese products. So their industrial materials were sitting in the warehouses. Companies were forced to do the unthinkable and lay off workers, something Japanese companies tried extraordinarily not to do. And so the unemployment feeds the discontent of extreme nationalists, like this guy Hideki Tojo, who said that this was the government's fault, this was the civilian government's fault for giving in to Western demands. Western powers have taken over much of the globe, so if they can do it, why can't Japan do the same thing? So Hideki Tojo is going to be head of the Imperial War Council, and he is going to kick aside the emperor's brother, Prince Konyei, and institute the Imperial War Council as the government of Japan. The other thing that really makes the nationalist movement grow in Japan was some Western countries like the United States, Canada, and Australia had closed its doors to Japanese immigrants. They're like, what? Why do you take in people from everywhere else, but why not us? Japan was extremely proud of their accomplishments, their industrial achievements, their modernization. And banning Japanese from Western countries was an insult. It was a deep cut to the Japanese sense of honor. And so it's the military guys that feel, once again, Japan needs to expand into colonies. That'll get us recognition and show us that our people are no different. So in 1931, Japan invades Manchuria, where they blow up a section of their railroad and say the Chinese did it. They needed an excuse to enact the treaty that they had signed with the Chinese, allowing their army to intervene and take over. So overwhelmingly did the Japanese people stand behind this invasion that they said, hey, the military, not only we're going to expand here in Japan, we're going to take it all the way through Asia. So by the 1930s, Japanese nationalists enjoy overwhelming support for further foreign conquest. They finally stood up to the Western powers. And in 1937, the government is dominated by military war hawks like this guy, Tojo. And so they end the democratic reforms. They try and get rid of socialists and, communists. You guys know how I feel about that. But this is like, literally they're going to go out and find them and get rid of them. We're going to promote only Japanese things, like the ancient samurai warrior values, the code of Bushido, honor, devotion to duty, and absolute obedience to the emperor. And that the greatest thing a Japanese soldier could do is lay down his life for the emperor. If he did that, he would go straight into heaven. And so Japan becomes more militaristic. And they will take advantage of the Chinese Civil War between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong to gain more territory. In 1937, the Japanese are hoping to get a quick victory in China. But that doesn't happen, with China fighting its own war of nationalism. Japan needs to go after more industrial resources other than just oil, other than iron ore and bauxite. They need to get the oil and rubber from the Dutch East Indies and down here in Southeast Asia. So they make a mistake when they join the Rome to Berlin axis. Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler had formed what they call the Central Powers, where Europe will turn on the axis of these great empires, Germany and Italy, and now Japan jumps in with them. And going after this oil and rubber will threaten not only Western European profits and territory, but the United States, like the Philippines and our allies down here in Australia as well. So the Japanese government joins Japan and Germany, forming the Axis powers. and Japan will begin to plan the attack on Pearl Harbor. It started back in the early 1930s, and when Japan, while they still had negotiations with President Roosevelt, attacks Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, World War II quickly becomes a truly world war fought on every continent save Antarctica, will last 6.5 years and claim at least 69 million lives. But that is the extent of industrialization and nationalism in Japan. Our next unit is imperialism. Feel free to hit me with any questions. Check out the College Board website. I'm thinking that this is going to be either a series of short essay questions or possibly a compare and contrast, change over time, or one DBQ. We only have 45 minutes for this year, so as I get more information, I will send it out to you guys. All right, hope to see you guys soon. Stay safe.